G'day, I'm Mark Hoth and welcome to Swift Almanac. In the last lesson we stored our login details to the cloud so we could log in from multiple devices. This lesson we'll be using Firebase, a Google database, to log in with third-party authentication using OAuth 2. Even if you don't need to use Firebase as a database, it's a great tool for a login server as it handles a lot of common APIs like Google, Facebook, email and password, phone, GitHub and more. If you aren't quite sure what OAuth 2 or third-party authentication is, let me explain. Let's say you have a Google email and password and Google can check those and you want to use the same email and password in order to log into an app. However, it's a real hassle when you change passwords to do it on every app. So what happens is the app will send you to Google and Google will check your email and password. If they're correct, Google will send the app a token, and that token can be used to verify that you've logged in. Sometimes the token is for single use, other times it's for a fixed period of time, and sometimes it's indefinite. But while the token remains valid, then the app has authenticated you, and only that app has authenticated you, and you don't need to supply your username and password again until the token expires. Or the authentication is handled by a third party, in this case, Google. Let's show you how it's done. Okay, well the first thing we're going to want to do is get a copy of our source code. So let's go to source control and clone, and you're going to want to download login 5. It's our starting source, and we'll save that to the desktop. And then if you want to find out what the final product looks like, download login 6 as well. And I've already got that there, so I don't need to download it again. We've got our project. The first thing we need to do is actually go to Firebase because we're going to install Firebase. So let's see what it says there. Firebase.com, which takes you to firebase.google.com. And then if you click on, well, firstly, you need to have a project. If you don't have a project, then have a look at my introduction to Firebase tutorial. Okay, so I've got my Swift Almanac project already configured, and I had a Firebase test app, but we need to create a new app, and it's going to be an iOS app. And this is the bundle ID of the app, which of course is all going to be in lowercase. Swift Almanac, I can never spell it correctly, almanac.login. Nickname, login. It's not in the App Store, so there's no need to put anything there. We register the app. Now we need to get this Google service info.plist file. So we just download that. And I'll copy that to my desktop. Now you'll see here that it's got an _2. That's because I've downloaded multiple copies before. So I need to get rid of this because it specifically needs to find only that version, and I will move that under my info.plist. And this is the first time I have installed or run anything under the new Xcode 9, which was available exactly this morning. So there may or may not be a bug. We'll run it a bit later and find out, but there was previously. So we've installed it and it's in our list of files. Now we need to create a pod file. We've already got a pod file for our login. So we just open it up and we need to add the pods Firebase core and the pod Firebase auth because we're going to be doing some authentication. And there's another pod that we need to add, and I'll just check what it was. It's something to do with Google sign-in. There it is. It is in fact Google sign in. And I'll update this to iOS 11. The target is login. That is correct. I'll just check to make sure it is. Yes, the target is login. So we'll save our pod file, and then we need to go into our directory in terminal, and we need to install those new pod. So we've added the pod, we've added the additional ones we need, and we need to type pod install. Looking good. And then finally, in our app delegate class, we need to add import Firebase and Firebase app.configure. So we go into our app delegate. At the top, we'll import Firebase, and here in our application did finish launching with options, we'll put Firebase app.configure. And we're going to get this error still about pod files, and we'll make that perform changes. Deployment target's correct. Now, let's just build this and see what it comes up with. Okay, so you see we've got this error. Don't worry about this one, but it says, could not find a valid Google service info.plist in your project, please download one. Well, we've already done that, and the solution is that you need to delete the file, remove the reference, don't move it to the trash, remove the reference, and then add the file again. And then this time when we run the application, we shouldn't get this error. Okay, and this time the app is working correctly, so we don't need to worry about that. So in our project, it'll create this app called Login, and we can see the settings in here. If we lose our Google service info plist, we can download it, but otherwise all of the information is contained therein. Now we're going to be doing authentication, and under the sign-in method, we're going to want to authenticate with Google, and you can see that it's enabled, and you just click here to unenable it. And so what we want to do is we want to go to the documentation, get started for iOS, then we go down to authentication and Google sign-in. So it says here, add these two pod files, which we added initially. If you haven't yet connected your app to the Firebase project, do so in the Firebase console, and we've already done that. Enable Google sign-in in the Firebase console, and I showed you how to do that under the auth section. And we enabled Google sign-in, and we click save. So we're all cool for that. What we've got to do is import Firebase and Google sign-in. It says here into our app, and essentially what we want to do is this needs to be done in our app delegate. And so what we'll do is we'll create an extension, and we'll call it It'll be a Swift file. Plus Google sign in. We'll create that. And what we need to do is create an extension for the app delegate, and we got to call GID sign in delegate. And of course we needed to import Firebase and import Google sign in. Now it's going to give us an error message here about conforming to the protocol. So we will command click, thank you, command click, and you can see that we need to have this sign in method, and optionally we need to have a sign in did disconnect. Okay, going back, if we look at our instructions, oh, there's this targeting thing that we need to do, but before we do that, we will copy these two lines here about the client ID and about the delegate itself, and it needs to be placed under fire app.configure. So we'll go back to our app delegate, and under Firebase app.configure, we'll place these two GD shared instance delegate, etc. Of course, we've only got import Firebase up here, so we better do that to get rid of these error messages. Now, one thing that we do need to do, just flicking back up here, is we need to get this URL scheme all sorted. So you go into the Google service info, and you can open as source code or property list. You can look at as a property list, and then you want this reverse client ID, and you need to copy that, and then under login, click on login target, and then click on info, and then you'll have this URL types down the bottom, and you click on the plus sign, and in that URL scheme you paste the Google that Google URL that we took out of the Google service info. So basically what this URL type is saying is if something comes back, this is a website that we trust, and if something comes back from here, then the application is going to pass the information to us. So basically all apps have a URL, and when our app is going to authenticate us, it's going to send us to a Google website where we're going to enter in our user ID and password, and then this is the URL that Google knows our app as, and it's going to return the token and error values and things like that through this URL. So our app needs to know what this URL is, so that if it sees it, it can go, hey, that's for me, and it grabs the information. That's sort of it in a nutshell. Okay, so we've got our URL scheme all happening. We've set up our GOD sign-in delegate, and we need to get these applications happening. So this function here, we need to just copy and paste. It's part of our app delegate, and typically, so what this is saying is if we do get a URL, which is the URL we've just plugged into our login, then we send that information to this Google sign-in handle, the URL, and it'll get all the data and stuff that's passed to us and access it for us. Pretty sure we don't need that. Okay. Now, if you're planning on running on iOS 8 or older, then you need to have this. We're not planning on running on OS 8. Then the instructions give us the code for the two protocol stubs, so we can copy and paste those and simply place them here in our extension. So the first one is simply, which is the mandatory one, it's saying, have we signed in and is there an error? So if there's an error, we'll just print error. So what we're doing here is, if we don't get an error, we're getting this authentication token that's been returned by Google. That's for our token from Google. And then what we need to do is we need to add some code to send that off to Firebase. So that's that third-party authentication I was talking about. I just typed pass to Google. I meant to say pass to Firebase. In any event, back here in the Google config, there's some source code. There it is, which we'll copy. And we'll paste it in here, and that's our Firebase authentication. So we're passing the credential from Google, and we're taking that credential from Google, and then we're passing it to Firebase, and then it's going to save that credential and log us in if it matches what we previously had. So now we glanced over something earlier. Here we need to, for our sign-in view controller, which for us is our login view controller, we need to implement this GID sign-in UI delegate protocol, and then we need to add these two lines in the view.load. So that's pretty straightforward to do. We go into our login, no we don't, we go into our login view controller under view controllers. And what's it called? Well, it's called GID sign in. Okay, so at the top we're going to have to import Firebase and import Google sign in. Sign in UI, user interface, delegate. So there's two different delegates here. And essentially what this delegate is and what the Google API is doing is it's going to provide us with a button. And what we need to do is, for the time being at least, put these two calls in here. Now we're actually not going to call sign in when this thing pops up. It's we'll break it out for now. This is the call that we need to make in order to authenticate and sign in. So we're not going to call it in view.load. That's a silly place to call it. So now what we need to do is we need to look at our user interface and see what we can do. And if we look at the instructions from Firebase here, it says add a GD sign-in button to your storyboard zip file or instantiate it programmatically. To add the button to your storyboard zip file, add a view. Okay, so even though it's a button, don't get confused and add a button. You need to add a view and set its custom class to GID sign-in button. If you add a button, then this custom class won't be there. So you need to add a view. So let's do that. So we go to the main storyboard. Here is our thing. Now one thing I did want to do is I want to move the email constraint center Y from -40 to 0. And then because of the way we've done everything, it's basically going to move everything down by 40. And then we need to find a plain view. Of course, if you type in view, 1000 view things come up. Down near the bottom, there it is there. So I'll put this view up here. Let's try and resize it. Let's just put these things in here. So we'll give it a width of 200 and we'll give it a height of 30. And we want to make it 16 to our bottom neighbor. We'll add those three constraints and then we'll just hold the, well, I can never get it right, control button down, move it to the right, and we will set it horizontally in the safe area. That gives us our four constraints and everything is fine. Now we need to go up here to our identity inspector, and where it's got custom class, we need to put GID sign in button. Let's run it and see what happens. Okay, so the Google API has provided this image and everything else. It's all part of the Google sign-in pod that we've installed. So this is not some magic image or anything like that. If you want to change this image, then you can create an outlet and you can get messages and things like that. It's beyond the scope of this. Now I'm not sure what happens if we click on it. Anything at the moment. Like always, do your best to get. You should get rid of every red error. It probably won't compile, and you should get rid of all the yellow errors as well. Even though they're just suggestions. If you make a big project, you can get hundreds of them, and you just get rid of them one at a time. So if we go back to our App Delegate Google sign-in, when we've signed in, user is signed in, what do we want to do? Well, the first thing we want to do is we want to keep a record of the current user. So we'll create a record or a variable called current user, and that's going to be of type optional user. Now this user type here is provided by Firebase. And as it turns out, it's also the same data type or the same name of a data type that we've created in our user defaults. You might recall that we had, no, in user data perhaps, there it is. We have a structure called user, so we can't have that. So we'll rename our user my user, and then we need to rename it everywhere that we called it. Yes, and we also called it in CloudKit. And let's find some more errors that we need to rectify. Yes. Okay, sorted those out. So let's go back to our app delegate. So if we signed in, what we want to do is we want to set this current user equal to auth.current user. And after we've done, we'll put a little print statement in here so that we know that we've actually authenticated for debugging purposes. And then we want to call our, if we've signed in, then we want to move to the home page. So we go move to the home screen. Now this did disconnect with, we don't need to call, but we'll just put a print statement in here saying print have disconnected. So we can log in by clicking on, that should take us to the home screen. And then the next thing we need to look at is when we're logging out, and we log out from our home view controller, and our logout action just moves us back to the login screen, but we actually need to tell Google that we've logged out, or Google and Firebase we've logged out. So we'll just create a new function, and that's just going to be called Firebase log out. I should have created it first. Anyway, and then back in our app delegate and Google sign in, it makes sense. It's going to be a global function, but we'll put it in this app delegate area because it's to do with signing in and signing out. So it's called Firebase log out. And what we want to do is we want to check to make sure that the current user is actually true. So doesn't equal nil. And then if we look at our Firebase code, authenticating, next steps, we need this let Firebase auth do, try, sign out, etc. So we can copy that and paste it in here. And then that will log us out. And well, we've already put in the home control to move back to the login screen. So even if we get an error, we've tried to log out, what can you do if it fails? You still want to take people back to the login screen and give them the appearance that they're logged out in any event. Okay, so there's still some things we need to do. If we go to the app delegate, now we've created that current user, and what we need to do is we need to find out when, or we need to set that current user value on startup. And the reason we're doing this is because it's possible that we can be logged into the app and essentially the token remains valid all the time until we click log out, or we log out from the Google website and say, no, we don't want to be part of that application anymore. So on startup, we need this current user value could actually be the value of a current user, and it could just go straight from, if we're currently logged in, then it can automatically log us in, similar to the way that the auto login works here. So we need to run a test. If current user equals nil, then we want to show this. Otherwise, we want to move to the home screen. Because here, we're already authenticated by Google. So we'll run this again. Right, so what's happened is, it believes we're already logged in because I've previously logged in. So I click on log out and it takes us back to the login container, and then if I click sign in, it'll sign us in. So the thing to remember here is with our Google sign in, if we go back to Google and we go back to our console, the first time we log in under authentication, it's going to place in our identifier, which is my real Gmail account, and it's going to say which provider it is, and this is our unique user ID. That's actually used for database storage, and we'll get that in, look at the Firebase lessons, but we don't need that right now. And essentially, as clients log into your app, their identifier, which will be their email address in most cases, will scroll down the list, and it'll tell you what the provider is. So it could be Google, could be Facebook, etc. And then over here on the right hand side, you can disable their account or delete the account. And I'll just delete the account now. And I will log out here, and maybe, if we're lucky, No, it still remembers who I am. And so what I would need to do is I'd need to log into Google OAuth and delete this app, and then it would send me off to the Google. You've seen it in Facebook, I'm sure, where you click on it the first time and it takes you, and you've got to log into Facebook or log into Google to authenticate yourself. I did that in testing, so now it knows all about me in some case somewhere, and so it's not bringing up that screen, but it will for you when you do it for the first time. And the other thing that I can show you is now I'm logged in, and so what should happen is if I stop running this and run it again, it shouldn't bring up the login screen at all. It should simply go straight to the home screen. And that's this code here saying on startup, grab me the current user if I'm authenticated already, which we are, and it just says move to the home screen. So if I log out and then run this code again, I'm logged out, so the current user is now going to be nil, and when this runs, it's going to come up with the game center. There you go. The other thing I'd point out to you is that all this is doing is authenticating. Down here, we were saving a username and a password in one of the databases, be it Core Data or CloudKit. Here, we're just getting a token. We don't know the username or the password or anything else about the person. We'd need to get that information if we wanted to store it as part of a preferences file or options or some such thing. Anyway, that's it. And that's it. Firebase with Google Authentication. Next lesson, we'll be adding Facebook authentication. If you have any questions about the tutorial, then please leave a comment below or hit me up on Twitter @SwiftAlmanac. Please subscribe to the channel, it's free, and check out our website at www.swiftalmanac.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.